This is Gemara Avodah Zarah Daf Ayin Vav Baruch Hashem. An exciting day in the world of Daf as we conclude this wonderful Masechta, Mesechus Avodah Zarah. And all the learning of this month, the month of Elul, has been generously sponsored as an incredible Schos Aliyas Neshama for Esther, Reyzel, Mair, Siyata de Shemaya. As we conclude this Masechta, all the Kayach HaTorah should bring Esther, Reyzel, Mair to incredibly high place in Gan Eden Shel Maila, as well as learning should be a Schos Refuah Shlema for Gavriel Simcha ben Miriam Ahuva b'Seich Sha'ar Chayle Yisrael. We're 3 lines from the bottom. We're middle of a segue from the halachos of Yayin Nesech. We got into the halachos of Bliyos, and now we're in the halachos of Tfilas Kelim. So it says the Gemara Kunya, if we have a utensil that has a coating on it, and Rashi here explains it's a cheres utensil that is coated with avar, with lead, that you bought from a guy. Says the Gemara, Pligi Bar Ravacha v'Ravina, we have a machlokes. Chad Amar kitchilasai, v'chad Amar kisaifai. Tchilasai means that it has a din of cheres that does not need tvila, and once it has din of seifai, then no, lemaisa, it's covered with lead, it's covered with metal, and therefore yes, needs tvila. Says the Gemara, what's halacha? Looks like it's seifai, that it indeed needs tvila. Asks the Gemara Ibayi Lahu on the first wide line, Mashkanta, what is the halacha for Yid has the utensil from a guy, but he has it b'toyres mashkin. It's not bought, it's not loaned, rather it's a mashkin. What is the halacha of that utensil? Most notably with regard to the halachas, as we'll see, of tvila. As we saw yesterday, that a borrowed utensil does not need tefillah, but a purchased utensil does. So what is the halachic status of a mashkin? Explains the Gemara, Amar Baravashi, Amar Baravashi, Abba mashkin le'akum kasa de kasba. Abba, my father was given a kasa de kasba, silver goblet from a guy, va'at b'lei ve'ishtei b'hei, and he toiveled it and he drank with it. But says Rav Mar Baravashi lo yadan, I don't know. Is it because the other mashkin is a din of a sale, therefore needs tefillah? Or was this a specific case that Mar Baravashi saw that the guy never really intended of paying back the alva, therefore he's going to keep this kli forever, and that's why he toiveled it? Tanarabanan, halakegli dashes mina, comes someone buys a food utensil from a guy, something that the guy did not use prior. You toivel it, you put in the mikvah, and you are tar. Something that the guy did use. So if he used it like it's through cold, like cups and plates and flasks. So what do you do with them to cleanse them? And you just rinse them off, and then you put in the mikvah. But something that the guy used with hot, pots, kettles, and urns. What's the halacha? As we've seen already, the way the blia goes in is the way that you have to take it out, and therefore, first you have to purge it, first you have to put it into boiling water, and then umatbilan vein tvar. Third level, something that is used with fire, like spits and grills. Then they need libon, and you have to do libon, you have to do fire to purge them, and then they're tar. But in all of these cases, if they were used before they put in the mikvah, or before they were kashered. Before there was libon. What's the halacha? Says we have a machlokes. Tonichada aser, v'tani idach mutter. We have a machlokes. What would be the status post facto if the item was used before kashering it and toiveling it? So explains the Gemara. What's the machlokes? Loi kasha tani idach mutter. Loi kasha, meaning we have two braysos. Gemara says they're not steers. Hakamander v'noistan lefgam is aser. Hakamander v'noistan lefgam is mutter, as we've seen already. After 24 hours elapsed, the taste in the keli is lefgam, is detrimental, and therefore now the shaila is, what is the status when that taste comes out? So says the Gemara, we've had this prior. It's machlokes whether it's mutter or aser. Ask the Gemara 2 lines to the bottom. Uleman, darbanatan lefgam mutter. Kiuli akom d'azar achmano. Heichim b'shkachas la. What is the case of bliyos of a guy's keli that's going to aser? Neisi tam lefgam is mutter. Amar chivei dravuna loy aser teira. As we just explained, ela kedera bas yoima. Says the Gemara, you're right. A kli that's 24 hours elapsed, it is indeed will never be aser. You know the case that's aser is when it's a bas yoima. Why? Because at that point it's tam live shvach. And Rashi says, what's a bas yoima? That the guy cooked it with it today. Kiman mikan velach, excuse me. Says the Gemara, you're going to tell me from that moment and onwards, the second line of Ayin Vavam and Aleph Lishtri, are you going to tell me that it should be mutter? But we just said, not that way. Says the Gemara, sounds like once it's not a bas yoima, you're allowed to use it. We said not to, so you have to kasher. If you didn't kasher, but you have a post facto, then the food is mutter. But for this brayse, it sounds like lechatchila. You could go and use that kli. Explains the Gemara, you're right. It should be mutter, but kedera she'enoi bas yoima, she'kedera bas yoima, which really all of kasher is predicated on this line. That what be'etzem, once 24 hours elapses, any absorbed taste inside a utensil is pogum, is detrimental. At that point, be'etzem, you can do whatever you want with it, whether it's a treifa pot after 24 hours, whether it's a milchig pot after 24 hours using for fleishiks. So why not? Because the gzeira you might come to use a bas yoima. Says the Gemara of Idach, according to the Shita Naitzam of Kamas Aser, Kedeira Bas Yema Nami Mifka Pagma. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. Even if it is a Bas Yema, it's still Aser. And therefore, what's the chalik between? And therefore, there's no chalik between Bas Yema and a Bas Yema. And therefore, you wouldn't be allowed to use it according to that Shita. Rami le Rav Amram the Ravashi. Rav Amram asked the following shaila to Rav Ashi. Tanan, we learned in a Mishnah. We just quoted this a moment ago. Ashudim achsalois milab non bar. They require bilia. They require liban. Excuse me. I v'tanan gabi kachim hashvod v'achsalois magilin bechamim. You just told me because it was used through fire, it has to be kasher through fire. But we have a Mishnah that says klap a kachim. The way to clean it is not such. The way to clean it, we see in the Mishnah by Kachim, is even Hagala will suffice. Says the Gemara. Amar lei, Rav Amram brei, ma inyin Kachim etzel kuliyakim. What's your kasha? There's no shaykhis. Why? And this line is so critically important. Says the Gemara, when it's a bli of kachim, it's hetera. When it was absorbed in, it was mutter. Why? Because the carbon you're allowed to eat, it's only after the time passes you can't eat it. So at the moment the food was cooked in this pot, it was beheter. Hasam over there, when we're talking about a Goyish Shabbat, be Isurai Bala, it went in Be'isr, and that's the reason why it's going to have different dinim. Amar Rava, but says Rava, 1 second, so you said Ki Kapolet, Isur Kapolet. Who cares how it went in? Who cares at the moment that the kachim went in, it was after, but now when it's coming out Be'isr. Ela Amar Rava, 12 lines down, the first line is Polit. Maya Agala Nami Shtifa Merika. When it says by kachim to Agala, it doesn't mean Sam Agala, it means rinsing and scouring. Amar le Abaye midami Meriko Shtifa b'tzainan Hagala b'chamim. Says Abaye, I don't understand. Midami Meriko Shtifa, scouring and rinsing his works with cold water. Hagala's with hot water. So what are you talking about, Rava? Ela Amar Abaye Yagid Alav Reyoi. Says Abaye, one case tells us it shows us what the din is in the other case. Tana Hacha, we learned over here Libon Vuadin Lagol. Tanas Magol Vuadin Libum. So Abaye is answering that really either one will suffice. Each Mishnah just says a different potential. Amar le Rava, what comes along Rava, 15 lines down. The first one line is Amar le. Comes along Rava, and Rava says, Yachil Lesaninu Lekula B'chada. Listeninu Chada B'idach Achriti. Says Rava, I don't understand. Teach us Hagala and Liban in one Mishnah, and say one of them in the other Mishnah. Basically, Rava's kasha is very confusing. One Mishnah says one, the other Mishnah says the other, and we're assuming they both go back and forth. Says Rava, why is that the way to teach it? So rather, Rava goes back and Rava gives a new teretz. Kodshim Ainu Taimayu. The reason why Kodshim, it's different. Kid Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Ravuot Amar Kol Yoim B'Yoim. Every day becomes a giul for its friend. Every day the pot is considered as if it was kasher from the previous day, since it was used every day. Therefore, it will continuously kasher itself, and therefore it's never going to have a moment in time where the bliya will become aser. Says the Gemara, wait, Teinach Shlamim, the Kiva Delishnei Yoimim is Achli. Says the Gemara, I understand by a Shlamim, since it can be eaten for 2 days. Mekam did have a nicer kavi giol. Before it's nicer, before the excessive time elapses, you're going to have giol, it will be purged, you'll have the kashering. Elachatos, but we have a problem. Kiva Deliyim, Velayla mit Achli. Chatos is eaten in 1 day and a night. So when the next day you're going to bring a chatos, at that point, there's no hagala, it's too late. Have a nicer. It's already going to be nicer. It's really going to be a forbidden bliya. And therefore, when you cook it the next day, there will indeed be a forbidden taste. So Rava, your teretz doesn't work. Says the Gemara Amri, they responded, they explained, you know what's going on over here? When do we say our goal is going to be enough? Is when he cooked a chatos, he then cooked a shlamim. The chatos de la machar, shlamim de etmol. Tomorrow's chatos and shlamim of the previous day, bahadi adadi. We're at the same time, because the time will finish, and therefore the mashal shlamim de la machar. Basically, they would be cognizant of this detail and make sure the bliya will never become lina before they cook the next food. Says Gemara, if this is true, you shouldn't eat anything, because it kashas itself. Says the Gemara, kasha, that is indeed a kasha. But Rav Papa comes along 10 lines from the bottom. The first line is Rav Papa, and he says, Hi karid, hi loy karid. Says Rav Papa that when you buy a pot from a guy, then it hardens. Whereas when it comes to the kachim, it does not harden. Why? Since it was consistently used by the kachim, that's why it requires lefts. Rav Ashi Amar, Rav Ashi comes along and Rav Ashi says, Lo ilam no kedamar mekar. really as we thought originally. Hacha teira bala, hachi surah bala. Ah, you had a kasha. The kasha lach to bin the kabbalah di surah kabbalah bin the kabbalah loy isili surah be'inei. Says Rav Ashi, I'll explain to you what's going on over here. Really, it's at your nisr. You had a kasha. The bin the kabbalah di surah kabbalah. That when the pot is used for kachim, it's already ulcer. The answer is no. Bin the kabbalah loy isili surah be'inei. You know why? Because there's no actual be'en. And therefore, since it's not going to be actual be'en, it's not going to cause a problem. The Gemara continues, what is the extent of libon? Amramani. Excuse me. Amramani. And these lines are very important to understand how hot libon has to be. Achetasha klipasan. Says Ramani, you know what Liban is? The outer layer has to be removed. You boil with a large pot, you put the smaller pot inside. So what do you do if you have a large pot? There was a duda, there was a cauldron in the Shev of Rav. Akavya, ahaderle, you know what they did? They put around this duda, around this cauldron, what do? Kedafna, they put around it a rim, delisha apumei, a rim of dough around the top of this massive water pipe, water jug. Why? So then you could fill it, mamish, to the top. Umalua maya, and they filled it up with water, and they boiled it up. Amar Rava, says Rava, who's the smart person who said this? The splattering of the boiling water, the fact that it's going to bubble over the edges, that'll be enough to kasha the pot. And this is lamaisa. If you have a large pot to kasha, you fill it up all the way to the top, you boil it up. Best is then to add on a little bit more boiling water or drop in a boiling brick so that you have the overflow of boiling hot water as well. And we wrap up the Masechta by wrapping up the Mishnah by quoting the end of the Mishnah, which said, what is the status of a knife, a sakin, sofa, v'ta'ira? You scrape it and it's tahar. Amar Rav Ukva barachama v'noyatza asara ba'amim b'karka. You have a knife that became treif, you know what you have to do? You have to stab it 10 times in the ground. Amar Avuna B'Redav Yeshua, not stam karko, but karka sheina avuda, land that was never worked, very firm land. Amar Rav Kahana b'sakin yafa sheiba gumais, has to be a knife that doesn't have any blemishes. Tanam yachi sakin yafa sheiba gumos lots of sarapam b'karka. So you have a knife that was used for the wrong gender, your milchig knife they use for fleishiks. So now the cutting process imparts a blia into the knife. Got to stab it 10 times into the ground. If this is only if you want to use the knife to use cold stuff. She brought in front of them, and Esrog pasik achal. The king Shabbos took off a piece and ate it. Pasik achal, pasik v'havlei. Then he gave it to Batibar Tuvi. He'd stabbed the knife 10 times in the ground to remove any of the residue left over. Pasak havle lemar Yehuda. He cut off a piece of Yitzhak of Yehuda. Amrle Bati Bar Tuvi. So Bar Tuvi said, Vahu Gavra Lavar Yisraelu. Is Bati Bar Tuvi. And this person, is this person himself not a Yid? That you're not worried? Who? Amrle Markim Levigavei, Mar Lokim Levigavei. The king said, Mar Yehuda, I know what's going on, whereas this other one, Bati Bar Tuvi, I do not. And says the Gemara, Ikdiyam another shot, Amrle Itkar, my Ovda Be'orta. The Melech Shapar said, Bati Bar Tuvi, remember what you did last night, and that's the reason why Bati Bar Tuvi, that's the reason why he didn't have a Nehemanis. Rashi spells out that the Parsiim would give their wives over to the guests. So the fact that Bati Bar Tuvi accepted this woman, that's why he lost his nemanis. We'll just point out that this whole thing of stabbing 10 times in the ground is not such a pasha thing la'alacha to find appropriate ground. But on the flip side, there are shitas that hold that, let's say, for example, you take your knife and you clean it with steel wool. That cleaning process is the same level as stabbing in the ground 10 times. Meir take accomplishment, 2 small mesechtais of Harius and Idius on tap before we get to Kachim. B'siyata d'shmaya, mazel tov, a continued schos to be able to learn together with so many of you. We should continue chazering Mirza Hashem.